just gonna jump right in and look at some features. Right before we start though, I'll mention that from the Revizto website, you can download the software here, and I'll keep my eyes on comments as well. I want to try and answer any questions that might come up. And so you can read my bio on the invite, but just a couple quick plugs. I've written a few Revit textbooks. One of the newest ones I've written is the Architectural Command Reference Guide, and there's a 2018 version, co-author with Jeff Hansen from Autodesk. About 85% of the model that you'll see in Revizto today comes from the result of working through this interior design using Autodesk Revit textbook. And then I also have a blog called BIM Chapters. You can check that out if you're interested. And one more, well, two more things to point out before we jump in. My favorite way for navigating a Revizto model is using the 3D connection mouse. I'll show you why once we jump into Revizto. I think it's the easiest, most elegant way to get around within the software. And then finally, the computer that I'm using today has a Quadro P5000. Let's see. Getting a message that there's no audio. So let's see, looks like audio should be working on my end.
I can hear you.
Oh, you can? Okay, good. I just got a text message from somebody who's watching the webinar, but so Mark, you can hear me just fine?
I can hear a few other people here. Let me see here. So a couple other people said they weren't able to hear as well. Did you hit the start button, Dan, on your side as the presenter?
Well, I hit show screen, and I've used GoToMeeting before. I don't see a start button per se.
Okay. I don't know why they wouldn't be able to. I can hear you just fine.
Yep.
Has audio started?
My little microphone is green. Maybe somebody else can type in and let us know if they can hear okay. Let me know when you see a reply, Mark.
GoToMeeting says it will begin shortly, is what somebody just posted in. So I'm going to try to. Let's see here. Just trying to see on our side if there's any.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, maybe that did it.
We try that again. Can somebody verify if you guys can hear us now?
Yep, and this is Dan Stine, the presenter. Hopefully you can hear me.
Okay, I think we're all good now. So we apologize for that. It looked like we were talking to ourselves there. We had a little bit of technical difficulty here. So yeah, we're getting some solid feedback from everybody. Sounds like everybody can hear us now. So well, I'll do this again. I apologize. Let's introduce Dan Stine. He was fortunate enough to dedicate some time today to go through some of the stuff within Revizto with Dan Stine. So thanks again for joining us here, Dan.
Oh yes, no problem, Mark. Thanks for the intro. Sorry for the mix-up here and getting this thing started. We're getting started super late, but I have lots of good stuff to go through, and I'm pretty sure I can get it done in the allotted time. So first of all, from the Revizto website, you can download the software, clicking the download tab at the top, and you can see it works with several programs, not just Revit, and then it also works on an iPad and a Microsoft Surface. I'll touch on that a little bit more later. A couple of things about myself. So I've written multiple Revit textbooks. The newest one is the Command Reference Guide with a focus on architectural features of Autodesk Revit 2018 with co-author Jeff Hansen from Autodesk. About 85% of what you'll see in Revizto today is actually coming from the model that is the result of working through this interior design Revit textbook. I'm also a blogger. I have a blog called BIM Chapters. You can check that out via bimchapters.blogspot.com. One of my favorite ways of navigating in Revizto is the 3D Connection mouse. I'll explain why a little bit more later, but basically it's what I'm talking about is the simple $100 version that they have, not necessarily the big one with all the buttons. So one of these bottom options here. And then finally, today I'm using a Quadro P5000 NVIDIA graphics card during this presentation. And a while back in March, NVIDIA did a customer success story on our use of their high-end professional Quadro graphics cards. You can read a little bit about that at the NVIDIA website. All right, so we're going to jump into Revit first. I just want to highlight a few things. The crux of this whole presentation is let's see how we can use Revizto to engage a client when we're trying to convey our proposed design during a client meeting. So of course there's a couple things we're going to want to do before the meeting to get things set up. One of those is to create an export view in Revit. This is just a simple view that you can always set to be the default, and then when you export the model, whatever settings are applied to this view and whatever geometry is visible is what's going to get exported to Revizto. So an important step in this specific view that we're creating is to set the detail level to fine, and then also go into the visibility and graphics controls and make sure all the categories are on that you want. So if you don't have it set to fine, you might be missing elements like the poles on casework, or bar joists aren't going to have the webbing in them. Various things like that won't show up properly. Another thing that you can do to kind of prepare to streamline some navigation options within Revizto is to set up some 3D or camera views. You can see I have several views set up in Revit that are cropped views. They basically have the section box turned on, and this will allow me to jump to a specific area. And on really large buildings, having a cropped view be the only thing that shows up on the screen can basically make a big difference when you're trying to navigate. So if I were to click on something like this mock courtroom, you can see I have a section box applied that will be exactly what we see here in Revizto. We can jump right to it in front of the client. Setting up those views is actually pretty easy, and I have a little trick I'd like to show you. If we wanted to set up a similar view for this fitness center, we can actually just select two elements that are kind of at the extreme end of each area, and then use the section box command. And that opens up the default 3D view. And then what we can do is just rename that right away, because every time you use that command, it always goes to that same default 3D view. So cropped view exercise center. And then I might want to adjust this a little bit so that we can see down into the space from above. There we go. And then I'll close that view and Control Tab back to our overall view, close all the hidden views. I might go ahead and save the model at this point. And then when you install Revizto on your computer, it adds a tab to the ribbon, and we have this command to export to Revizto. So within just a matter of minutes, you can get your model from Revit out to Revizto. If you're exporting the sheets, this would be similar to having a set of PDFs associated with the 3D model, but in a much more intelligent way. I'll show you that in a little bit. This takes a bit longer, especially depending on the number of sheets. This will include all the sheets from the linked MEP and structural models as well, from the perspective of exporting from the architectural model. You can also export phases if your project has them. And then there's an option to export render appearance, which is going to be the actual textures like the brick JPEG or PNG file and things like that that are applied. If you uncheck that, it'll be like the shaded view, which on really large projects, like a 1 million square foot building, you might opt to do that to be able to navigate the entire model. Otherwise, you could just export a cropped view. So like in this view, there is a section box applied, and that's gonna constrain the overall extents of whatever shows up in Revizto. However, with this larger model, I can crop it down smaller in Revizto, but I can't add stuff that's not actually in the Revizto format. So we'll start out with an overall large view. That's going to be what we export. And then I typically would leave all of these checked. I'm just going to switch to Revizto and save us. Even with the sheets turned off, it'd take about 3 to 4 minutes to export this. So I'll save that time, especially seeing as we had a late start. There's a couple options here to open the issue tracker and to create a new issue. We'll talk about that in Revizto in the context of a client meeting. I have couple of suggestions on how you can use that functionality. And then another really cool feature that I don't hear a lot of people talking about that are familiar with Revizto and use it is that you can schedule an automatic export. You can have it be every Friday, you could have it be every night at 2 a.m. and also have it sync with the cloud. So if you're looking at your model, your Revizto model on an iPad or a computer or a Microsoft Surface, no matter where you're looking at it from, if you're exporting it nightly, for example, at 2 a.m., you'd actually be always looking at a model that was never more than 24 hours out of date. All right, so I think I hit all the points I wanted to talk about as far as the Revit model setup. So we're going to set up a 3D view that we can always go to, and nobody's going to hide things. Nobody's going to change the detail level. We're going to set up some cropped views. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to mention, if we, so if I select a floor here real quick. And then I'll just do the isolate element. And so now when I turn on realistic mode, it's only going to take a few seconds. So because I can see the materials on the screen, I know that the paths are mapped properly to any custom materials I may have made. If you're working on a different computer than the computer that these materials were initially set up on, some of those materials might not be found by Revit. Therefore, Revizto will not find them either in most cases. So what we want to do is put all our custom appearance assets in a folder on the network or in your project folder, and then in options, the Revit options dialog box, we can go into the rendering tab and then just make sure we point to wherever those materials are. So if I go to the C drive and Revit, that's not the C drive, and then textures, I have this folder with all these various textures that I'm using for this project. So here's the porcelain tile pattern that you'll see when we go into the lobby space. All right, so that's all for Revit. Now, once we click this export to Revizto, it'll automatically open Revizto and basically drop us into this 3D view. Now, there's still a couple more things that we want to do even in Revizto before we run off to the client meeting. There's a couple of really handy things that we can do to get things set up. The very first thing, which actually can take quite a bit of time, this might even be like an overnight kind of processing thing depending on how big your project is, but you can see here that there's no light sources visible, and the default with Revizto in the viewer is no lights are on. There's an edit button in the upper left, and we can switch into edit mode. So this opens what's called the Revizto editor, and in this mode there's some helpful like last minute material changes you might need to make without having to go back into Revit and export. And once you load that, you can see the materials are still visible, but so are the light sources. And this may be a little choppy and kind of slow on your computer because this is obviously going over the internet. But there's some interesting opportunities in here to adjust some of the environment settings. We can select a light and adjust some individual settings. If we were to select like this spotlight, you can see there's some angling adjustments that I can make. So these are, it's better to make these kind of changes back in Revit, but if you have a meeting in a few minutes and you have to get this thing done, you have an opportunity to make a few tweaks outside of Revit. Another interesting thing that you can do, and this is the part that can take a long time, is you can actually bake the sun shadows. You can change this between fast and quality, which of course bumps these settings up for quality and makes it take longer. But you can bake the lights, which basically means this hot spot that you see on the wall, Revizto is not trying to create that light condition in real time. It's been baked into the texture on the wall. Any shadows on the floor, if you have it bake the sun shadows, all that stuff being baked into place is going to make the model look better and also perform better because it doesn't have to create those light situations. Baking the sun shadows might be a negative thing to do if you end up deciding to change the time of day or something like that. But here's the materials tab where you can get in to adjust textures, and under objects you can hide certain things if you need to. You can do that in the viewer as well. So I'm not actually going to change anything. I'll just close this and get back into Revizto. Now, before I go any further, I just want to show you what I mean by the 3D connection mouse is kind of the nicest option in my opinion. With this mouse, you can actually move in 4 different directions at once. So I can push the little mouse away from me, and by the way, it's on my non-dominant hand, so I'm still using my, in my case, I'm right-handed, so I'm using my right hand to move the cursor around and click commands, but I'm using my left hand to twist this 3D mouse. The base actually is really heavy and it doesn't move on the table. So I can twist it, that's moving one direction. I can push it away from me, that's another direction. I can push down or pull up on it, that's a third direction. And then I can also tilt it. So what's really cool is you can do all of that at once with one hand. And this is, I think, the most elegant and smooth way to move around in Revizto. I'm no expert at an Xbox controller. I know that's supported as well, but I'm pretty sure you can't do all 4 movements at the same time and with one hand. So it makes for a really nice, smooth, like cinematographic type experience. All right, so the couple other setup things that I like to recommend is one nice feature Revizto has is this home icon. So if you click home, it always jumps you back to that same spot. Well, you can actually create your own home setting. So let's say we actually wanted to be on the ground at the end of this walkway to the entrance into the building. So I'm going to get about close to above the sidewalk and where I want to be, and then I'm going to click the walk toggle. So that basically turns on gravity, and there's an eye height that can be set. On the camera tab here, there's eye height, and we were doing a presentation at an elementary school a few months back, and a little kid raised his hand. He could tell it was a really high vantage point and asked if, can that be changed to my height? And we said, of course, and went in here and adjusted it. So anyways, once you get yourself where you want the new home location to be, I'm going to go into the 3D view list, and I'm going to click the plus symbol and type a name for this view. You can make as many views as you want, but I'm making one that is going to be the home view, so I'm going to just call it that. And then I'm going to click on the home icon here. So now it has home next, has a little home symbol next to the word home. So now if I toggle off walk mode, now I'm in a mode where I'm not constrained by gravity. And anytime if I'm switching between users for VR or just showing different groups of people, I can always click this home icon, and it's going to jump me back to the same exact starting point. So we can set the home view. We can consider whether we want to do the baked lighting or not. And then the next thing we can do before the client meeting is actually create a few issues. So the issue tracker in Revizto is meant to be like internal design coordination, where you're giving team members tasks to fix clashes or things like that, or it's used during construction administration to facilitate ASIs, but it can also be used as a kind of a slide deck, if you will. So on the top center here, there's 2D, 3D, and issue tracker. We started out in 3D. 2D is going to be the sheets that we'll look at later, and then the issue tracker. So in this issue tracker, I can create some static views to highlight some features related to my project. So I might consider this like a PowerPoint slide deck, and these all become static images. So if the Revizto model changed, like that chair behind the reception desk changed to a black backrest from this burgundy color, that wouldn't affect this slide per se. But anyways, all of these slides are actually controlled and can be filtered by tags. So client meeting 01, you can see over here on the far right. I'll show you how I create that in a minute. But if we start looking at this slide with the client, as I already mentioned, this is a static image and it has some notes that I had added. If the client says, well, can you zoom in on that bollard light? You know, I can basically switch from the vantage point, or I can switch to the vantage point in which this issue was started. So just clicking this 3D icon on the left, now I'm back in the 3D model at that same location. So I can use these issues to basically jump around. Here's another one I set up in the lobby. Oh, there we go. So here's the one I set up in the lobby with some various notes. So there's a note to remind myself to talk to the client about what kind of support options. We could have some exposed brackets or something, some steel channels and angles that would be buried in the wall but might cost a lot more. So we have these various slides basically. Here's the mock courtroom. So this project that we're looking at is a law office, and they have a mock courtroom, kind of like the TV show Bull. They can come in here and try and figure out how they're going to run their case. Here's another one that's based on one of the sheets. So now I'm in the 2D section, and I put a note in the plan view to talk to the client. So how I set that up then, if I want to set up another one somewhere in the project, is to go position yourself where you want this comment to be. And actually, maybe I want to do, like the mock courtroom, it was a cutaway view. So I'm going to click on the views tag here. And you remember in Revit, I had set up some cropped views. So I can look at my various cropped views. I can go to this casework, the cafe casework option. And I believe I have another one in here. Here it is. So here's one looking at it from above. So again, I'm using my 3D mouse to just quickly navigate. I'm not having to push a bunch of arrow keys on the keyboard. I can kind of get this position the way I want. You can position it any way you want, and then just click on the create issue. And you can name this whatever you want because you'll be sorting these by a tag. You don't have to give it any real specific name. So just similar to the other named issues, I'm just going to call it Cafe Highlights, and then I can start adding notes. So pendant lights. I can add clouded areas if I want. And maybe all the ones related to the client meetings have this yellow infill just to make them stand out a little different. And so just like Bluebeam or Adobe Acrobat, I can add all these markups. And then when I'm done, I click the done button. And then here I can assign this to somebody, but I don't have to. I can just ignore that and leave it assigned to myself. The only thing I might want to do so I can filter all of this is just say this is part of client meeting 01 and click done. So later I can filter by all of those particular issues. And then I'll just go back to the 3D model, and I can click home if I want to get back to kind of the home view. And now when I go back to the issue tracker and click on Cafe Highlights, this view comes up. This actually is not, this is a different markup that I'm going to talk about later. So there's highlights we can put on the plans, and then notes that we can put in basically static 3D views. All right, so now we have this thing all set up and ready to run off to the meeting. This model can be synced with the cloud, and then if the client is actually not in the same room as you, one option is for them to have Revizto and open the model, and you can do a camera share with them. So there's this feature where you can click on camera share, and all the people who are part of the project team who are currently in the model, their own local copy that's been synced from the cloud, you can click on their name and initiate a camera share. I did that recently where one of our design teams was in Nebraska at a project that we were working on, and they opened up Revizto, and my role was to basically walk through the model from a BIM perspective. So I didn't need to go to Nebraska for my little half-hour, 45-minute piece. So we just did the camera share feature, and basically both models are being run from the local hard drive, and the only thing going over the internet is the XYZ in direction you're looking of the camera. So it makes it super smooth for everybody, unlike what you might be seeing now, which might be a little choppy. All right, so now that we're running off to the meeting, there's lots of interesting things we can look at right off the bat, just to kind of give a high-level overview of the project. One that I really like is the section tool. So if we pick this section tool, it almost doesn't matter how big the project is. We can quickly cut a section. And what's really cool is with this 3D mouse again, I can actually be dragging this section marker up and pulling the mouse up as well. So you get a really interesting kind of dynamic view of the section. So like here, I'll be cutting it from the side. And so I'm using the mouse to drag the section to the right, and I'm using the 3D mouse to push the camera at about the same rate. So we're getting a really cool kind of dramatic view, and now I'm pushing the 3D mouse to the right, or to the left, I mean. So as we're looking at this with the client, depending on the client's interest, they kind of are going to direct the experience of where we're going to drive. So maybe there's just a random question about do we have outlets for this appliance in this vending machine? So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to turn off the section box now. There's a clear button. I hit clear, and then I'm going to need to click the X in the far right to kind of get out of that section mode. So the easiest way to figure out if there's something behind these is just to hide it real quick. You turn on the objects command, and you could find it in this list or turn off an entire category. But when you have the objects list open, you double click on something and you close the properties real quick, and it highlights it in the project, in the object list. So I can just turn it off real quick, and yep, sure enough, there's an outlet. You'll see in this particular model, I have some really highly defined receptacles and light switches and door hardware. Now that I see that that's there, I can turn it back on. I'll double click on the refrigerator. And when we double click on an object in general, whether we have objects open or not, we can see all the properties associated with that object. All the Revit metadata basically has been exported from the Revit model and is associated with the objects. There is a little visibility icon here, but then that, if you turn it off here, it makes it harder to turn back on because now it's not selected and you have to go find it in this list. So what I like to do is turn on the object list, and then when I double click something, I'll just turn off the properties right away and then hide it, and I can see that has an outlet. And if this were a copy machine, for example, so I'm going to turn that back on, and I'm going to back up. Well, actually, so the client says, well, let's go double check the copier in the workroom. And there's two ways to quickly get there. One is to open up the map view, and I'm just scrolling in with my cursor. When you have the map view open, it automatically is driving this information from that model we exported from Revit. All the finished material is showing up, and all the levels are automatically exporting. And all the room name and numbers and the grids are showing up. And here's where we are, the little icon, kind of like Google Map. If I double click in the workroom, it basically just jumped me to the workroom. Now let me just kind of fly out of this model again real quick to show you the other way of quickly getting to that room. There is a list of rooms. It's the door icon, and I can just start typing the number or some of the words, So I just typed work, and it looks like there's 2 rooms listed here called workroom. There's one on, I believe, the 2nd floor, and then this 103 is the one on the 1st floor. Whenever this menu is open for the actual room list, all the adjacent rooms show up, which is really nice. So in that direction is the lobby and the file room. And in this direction, basically beyond that wall, is the lunchroom, and the room that we're in is the workroom. So I'm going to close this, and that'll hide those items. I'm going to turn around, and there's a copy machine. So I'm going to turn on the object list again and double click on this, and I'll hide this. And so behind a copier, not only should there be an outlet, but there should be a data jack. So I can double click on this and see that this is a duplex receptacle, 180 volt load. I can double click on this next item and see that it's a data device. So this is all really important information that clients spending potentially millions of dollars are interested in understanding. I'm going to go, because I'm in fly mode, not walk mode, where gravity's off, I can go through walls and floors and everything. I'm going to go back over to the cafe one more time and double click on this outlet. So an outlet near a sink in the US, the code requires the GFCI, so ground fault. I can see right away that that is ground fault, but and I can also see there's a light source above on this high cabinet. But let's say that there's something here that the client doesn't like I click on the countertop, and from the material list here somewhere, we can see that it's like plastic laminate, and they want a solid surface countertop. Here's where we can start to capture the client comments. So when we get back to the office, we remember all the things, and instead of you just writing it down on a scribble on a piece of paper, the client feels a lot more confident of the conversation that you just had when they see you actually do a quick markup on the screen. So countertop material, you don't have to do a cloud if you're just doing a note for yourself, and you can type. You don't even necessarily have to make an arrow in text if the name of the issue is clear enough. So change to solid surface, and then I just click done. And the last step, just to keep this all organized, is to quickly go into tags and say this is part of the client meeting 01 feedback. You can create as many new tags as you want just by typing up here, but once you've made one, it'll always show up in the list. So now we just get back to the 3D view. A couple other really handy things with the software is the ability to measure. I'm going to turn walk mode on, and when walk mode is turned on, you'll automatically go upstairs, but you can't go through walls, and you can go through glass and doors. So here's a mechanical room, and so maybe the client's starting to wonder about some certain dimensions in here. I can click on the dimension tool and see the clear space here, but there's also an issue over here. Maybe it's kind of tight, 3'5". Basically, wherever you drag this thing, you can see what the dimension is from that surface perpendicular to whatever it hits. If I go to the floor, I could move it around just enough until eventually it will hit the bottom of that bar joist. So bottom of structure, this is assuming the roof structure isn't sloping and the floor isn't sloping. All of that stuff will actually be considered. We can switch between the minimum type of dimension. So I can double click on the air handling unit and the water heater, and it's going to tell me whatever the minimum space is between those 2 points. And then I can also pick any point I want and measure that way. So I can measure just about anything basically with the client and in front. in front of them. Now the other thing is, if we're looking at the model, and I'm going to go back out to the lobby, just bear with me for a minute as I fly like a ghost through this project. So we're looking at this model, and the client's wondering about these eyeball, I think they're called like eyeball type supply vents. And to quickly look at the mechanical system, there's a couple things we can do, and one of those is to filter the view. I'm going to go back into objects, and in addition to like turning on and off entire categories, like, you know, if I just wanted to see what it looked like without the walls for a minute, I can turn off the walls. I can make all the walls transparent, which is helpful to like make the ceilings transparent so that you can see all the MEP systems up in the ceiling space. You can also make the doors transparent, seeing as doors don't automatically open. But there's also a really nice built-in filter function in Revizto, and I can turn off maybe structure and architecture and just leave MEP turned on. And now I can kind of follow this thing back to where it goes. And in addition to this, if I turn on structure, one thing about structure is even in Revit, when you like filter the visibility controls in Revit, structure includes walls and floors. So I'm going to quickly turn off the walls and the floors so that we're just kind of focusing on the structure. And this all by itself is really nice, but it gets even better. So we can actually go to Revit. Well, actually, this one doesn't have Revit links. Normally, a real world project would have an architectural model, a structural model, and an MEP model, or an M and an E model. And on the links tab here, you can actually set the color of everything in each link. So all the structure could be a certain color. We can still do that in a more of a manual way. So I turn on structure and go down to, I'll just do it for columns real quick. I can make all the columns kind of a red color, maybe the framing as well. And maybe you make all the structural or the electrical like a yellow color. The ducts are a little bit hard to see. So maybe just the ducts real quick, I'll make like a blue color. And you see the fittings and accessories also need to be made blue for all of that to show up properly. So you have a lot of options here to control what shows up in the model with these filters. And actually, if I hit the home icon, this resets everything, so I don't really have to undo all of that, which is nice. We only have a few more minutes left. I'm going to go to the 2D sheets real quick. And if I go to the master list, here are all the sheets that were exported directly from Revit. This would include all the linked model sheets as well, MEP and structural. You can even import PDF files, but in this case, here's an example of an issue, as I already showed earlier, right here, that basically is from a sheet where I marked up something that I wanted to talk about with the client. And you could do the same thing then to capture any issues that might come up, or feedback or comment from the client. Revizto automatically captures the live links. So if I want to go to this elevation, because it's a live elevation, I can click on it and it'll bring me directly to that view. So this is a live Revit view. Anytime you see these little icons in the lower left, that means Revizto knows that that's a live view, and it's it's allowing you to link to it. So here's a live cut through this custom reception desk. If I click on that, you can see down below there's some drafting views that are maybe from a standard detail library, but here's that live cut through the reception desk. If I click on that little green icon, again, there's a really cool thing that happens where it'll apply that cut to the 3D model exactly where that detail was cut from in the 3D model. But I can also drag the cut icon, and this is a great way. Again, I'm using the 3D mouse and the regular mouse together. Here I can see that the condition changed. So maybe I need another detail without the transaction counter or just something in the notes. And then eventually it changes even more drastically where now there's nothing under this counter, and that's where the note was that I added out in the lobby about wanting to discuss with the client where the support bracket would go. So let's see. We talked about the section tool, filters, the room objects, the rooms and the objects, and the issue tracker. There's a few more things that could be said, but I think this basically tells the story overall. We looked at the map, the room command, the views to allow us to jump around. Let me just show you one more real quick. So the toilet rooms, if you crop it down like this now, if you're in a really big school project and you have it cropped down around like a science classroom, this is going to be super smooth and basically easy to navigate compared to trying to do this within the context of the entire model and then fumbling with trying to crop it because within the section tool you can do a plane or a box, and Revizto is just applying its box functionality, so you can even adjust it from there if you want to look at anything that might be going on above that space. So that's it. I want to be respectful for your time, seeing as we started late. And because we started late, I really didn't leave much time for questions, but Mark and Armand and all the team at Revizto are, I'm sure, more than happy to help you out.
Thanks again for doing this, Dan. And to be honest, we actually only got a couple questions, and the one, a couple questions were the same. Is this going to be posted? Yes, it'll be on our YouTube page. And then somebody asked why I was kind of bouncing around, and that's because of the GoToMeeting or just the connection through webinar. So it felt like it was going frame by frame at some point, but that's just an internet connectivity. When you get into Revizto, it's going to be pretty smooth, like anything. So GoToMeeting will slow that down and kind of make it look a little bit more cumbersome than it actually is. So,
Right.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining. And I apologize. The technical difficulty was on our side, not on Dan's side in the beginning. So apologize for getting a late start on that. And thank you again, Dan, for allocating a chunk of your day to come talk about Revizto.
Sure, no problem. Glad to do it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.